on the kind of celebratory note, you were just mentioning that you have a pretty big anniversary coming up for yourself personally, with the 50-year anniversary of your ordination with Katagiri Roshi.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I know, I'm pretty surprised.
And that happened in the Bay Area at San Francisco Zen Center or thereabouts?
So it happened in Minnesota. He moved to Minnesota after Suzuki Roshi died. And I met him, and I did meet him in the Bay Area, though. I went looking for a teacher. I'm from Minnesota. I grew up in Minnesota. But I figured I could never find a teacher in Minnesota, right? So I went looking for a teacher, and I was looking for all kinds. I was looking for a Tai Chi teacher or something. So anyway, I ended in San Francisco. And when I got to San Francisco on my journey, I was broke. So I got a job and a place to stay. And I ended up moving in with some Zen people close to the Zen Center. And about maybe 4 or 5 days after I moved in, Katagiri Roshi came on a visit to San Francisco from Minnesota.
Wow.
So anyway, I heard him speak out at Green Gulch, and I said, yeah, I want to learn how to meditate from him. That's kind of the next thing. There was just something about his presence that caused me to. I couldn't understand him really. He had a very thick accent. It took me a long time to really understand what he was saying, but I just felt something from his presence. He's like Thich Nhat Hanh, Have you ever been in Thich Nhat Hanh's presence?
No.
Something about his presence that you just feel something.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful that you felt that connection, even though the verbal communication wasn't necessarily where you could have a lot of conversation, or the understanding him in that way wasn't necessarily available, but there was that presence that kind of drew you in enough to know that there was a connection, and a connection that you wanted to deepen, and that you knew that could be important for you, like that you'd kind of want to develop a meditation practice thereabouts. And had you always been interested in going into Buddhism? Because I know that early on in your life you were interested in pursuing a Catholic route.
Yes, I was in kindergarten. I was in a Catholic school. I went to Catholic schools all my life till I was about a junior in college, till I left the convent. When I was 5, I decided I wanted to be a priest, but they told me I couldn't be a priest because I was a girl. I had to be a nun. So I always wanted to be a nun, and I went to the convent after high school, and for various reasons, I left, and I was just turning 21, and I was a junior in college. So then I went to the university, but I actually started meditating in the Catholic Church. I belong to a citywide organization in Minneapolis of Catholic teenagers, that. And one of our commitments, we had 15 commitments, and one of our commitments was to meditate for 15 minutes a day. And that meant reading something, an inspiring reading. I had a little book of daily readings, and reading that, and then just sitting with that for 15 minutes. And of course, the challenge when you're about 14 years old is to remember to do it. So that was my first meditation challenge, was to remember every day, because you get busy, But that's part of it, is not letting yourself get so carried away that you don't remember to come back,
Yeah. And was the meditation within the framework of Catholicism, was there a point of focus that's maybe different than just a more secular mindfulness practice, or a Zen practice where there are other things that are a part of the approach, or was it more just like watch your breathing and watch your thoughts within the Catholic framework?
Well, within the Catholic, the way that I learned it was, to read one of these inspirational readings. And of course, they're in the context of the teachings of Christ and the spirit of Christ's life. But to me, it's just something that inspired me to live in a certain way, with a certain kind of awareness, you know.
Hmm.
But I think no matter what kind of meditation you do, it's the coming back. It's remembering to come back, you know. So when you're sitting there, if you have a point of focus like an inspirational reading, you know, you sit there and all of a sudden your mind is off somewhere, and then you say, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to be thinking about this. So you bring your mind back, and then your mind goes off again, and then you keep bringing your mind back, and it becomes more and more. That's the real practice to me. It's just coming back. Whatever you come back to, you know, that's fine.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, and I'm so glad that you were able to start kind of experimenting with it, start cultivating a meditation practice at such a young age, because I know like 14, 15, those are rowdy years or rowdy times, and you can have a whole lot of energy. And it's great that you were able to start practicing the honing of that and focusing it. And at some point you were mentioning that you had left college, and you had uh, begun to maybe lessen your commitment to the Catholic uh, approach or way of life. And at that time, like, what was there a lot of spiritual wanting or kind of seeking that you were in that time period, or did you find that you were more interested in reintegrating into a just like Catholic less engagement with the world, and you were okay with that more secular uh, time in your life?
I feel like I was kind of running the other way,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know. But at the same time, there was some seeking going on, you know. When I left the convent, it was like I was facing a blank wall, because really that was the only thing that I had ever really wanted to do. Although I always felt when I was in the convent, I remember I used to think, if I ever leave, I'm going to become a dancer, you know, because for some reason my body, you know, I have a very high metabolism, and my body needs to, I've got a lot of energy, you know. And when I left the convent, actually, the first thing I started doing was to start taking some dance classes. You know, at first at the University of Minnesota, I went to the University of Minnesota, which was a big shock. You know, I'd never been to a school that wasn't Catholic. And I hadn't been in a classroom with boys since I was in sixth grade, you know, and fresh out of the convent. So it was it was exciting and challenging. And it was also, you know, kind of led me in a real secular direction, something I'd never done before.
Mm.
But it was kind of like, after I left the convent, I became unafraid. What the hell, you know? I'll just see what's out here, you know? I'll just follow whatever I feel like. But I did explore some meditation during that time. I went to there was an Indian um, there was an Indian teacher. I don't know if he's still around. He was older. He was in Minneapolis, but for some reason I just couldn't connect with that group or something like that, you know. And maybe it was just that I wasn't ready to really jump back into a spiritual practice, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's such a different life too, when you're finding yourself leaving that community, leaving that pace of life and that familiarity, and going into, yeah, school with boys, and going to dance classes and things like that that aren't imbued with a spirituality necessarily in that same way. And then just briefly before we go more into your journey, what was something that like felt very important to you about Catholicism? I mean, because I understand that it's still something that there are still important elements of it. It sounds like in your practice or in your life now. And I was curious, like, what about the message or the path of Catholicism that was drawing you in so closely towards the beginning?
Well, I think maybe it probably started with my mother and my aunt who was my godmother. But my mother, she grew up with a mother that had become, I don't know if the word is agnostic. Her mother had been raised as Catholic, went to Catholic all the way through Catholic high school, and then just rejected it. And I won't go into the reasons, but I think I understand them. But so, you know, she didn't want her daughter to go to church either. She didn't want her kids to go to church. She didn't want to have anything to do with Catholicism. And but my mother converted when she was 18. She was just dying to be a Catholic, because part of my mother's father disappeared when she was about 6 years old, and so they never found him. And so basically her mother was a single parent, so trying to support two kids. And so my mother spent a lot of time with my great-grandmother, growing up with my great-grandmother. And so my great-grandmother was very Catholic, and that was who my mother really respected and admired. So she became a Catholic. And then her whole approach to Catholicism was, it's something you live in your everyday life. And then I went to a elementary school that was, just a very small, in fact, my great-grandmother had gone to the same elementary school. It was in a German part of Minneapolis. But they didn't speak German when I was there. But those nuns, I had really, really good models. They were really women who lived their spirituality. It wasn't a purely intellectual thing. So I think both of those combined really, and the convent too, the convent that I chose was in South Dakota. And I still go back, and I love those women. We don't, especially philosophically, we don't think alike, but our hearts are connected, And so I think that's probably the deepest source of inspiration. Katagiri Roshi was the same way. It was in his heart. It was all about how do you live your everyday life. He used to say, the purpose of this practice is to learn to live in peace and harmony with all beings. And that's what this little Buddha robe is, you've probably seen this before. It's sewn in the form of a rice field, because in the rice field, all beings exist in peace and harmony. And this is to remind us that that's what our practice is. And this was, apparently this was kind of the instructions of the Buddha, though who knows, but that was kind of the way he taught his disciples, to make their robes. And you have to do it in pieces, when you're poor, because you got to kind of gather it from.
Yeah. Well, so the raksu or the rakusu, that is like the rectangular shape that is supposed to mimic a rice field, right?
Well, if you look at it closely, and this is hard to see, maybe, can you see
Mhm.
there's the rice paddies, excuse me.
Oh, I see.
Much are the rice paddies, and then the walkways connect the rice paddies.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Wow.
It is a really beautiful thing. And we sew our own. This is a tradition that was kind of developed in a lineage that my teacher followed. My teacher had a teacher who had gone back and studied, well, not his teacher, his teacher's teacher had gone back and studied the teachings of Buddha about how to make a robe. So this is kind of based on those teachings, to make it in the form of a rice field. And
Yeah. And well, it's wonderful to hear that there was this that you have this connection, that there remains a connection, like a heart connection with some nuns, and also just Catholicism in general, that you've maintained, even though philosophically there are differences, but there is this heart connection that you have that remains, and you can go and still visit a convent in South Dakota and have continue that kind of relationship. And back, when you were leaving school and you were leaving Catholicism when you were younger, and you go and you find uh Katagiri Roshi in the Bay Area, and at one point, I mean, from what you were saying, he moved out to Minneapolis and you followed. Like, what at that point did you find that this was something that this person is something that is important enough for me to continue with, and to change my life around it, and move my foundation, my new position in the Bay Area, to go and follow him?
oh, my job was only temporary in San Francisco.
Mm.
It was supposed to be 3 months. I finished it in 2 months. I was retyping a training manual for the Trust for Public Land. And this was in 1975. And I got the job before I even had a place to stay. And I got it through somebody at the Zen Center. I had been exposed to Zen. Actually, I was first exposed to Zen in the convent when I was about 18 or 19 years old. One of my superiors had read an article about Zen, and she came and told us about Zen meditation. She came and told us because she was very impressed with it. And it was very interesting because I hadn't been back to the convent for many years, and I went back in 2017 or something like that. So I'd been out for like 50 years or something like that. And I really wanted to see this nun, this particular superior. And so when I saw her, she walked into the room and she said, "So, what have you been doing for the last 50 years?" And she was like almost 90. She was about to turn 90. And I didn't want to offend her, I didn't want to say, "Oh, I've become a Buddhist," because that might be offensive. So I said, "Oh, I've become a Zen meditation teacher." I said, "You're the first person that told me about Zen." And I thought she would say, "Oh, really? I don't know what you're talking about." But she said, "Oh, yes, I'm very interested in Zen." And she insisted on having a meeting with me before I left because she wanted me to tell her all about mindfulness. She'd been reading Thich Nhat Hanh. She was 90, and she'd been doing centering prayer for 15 years, which is essentially the same thing as Soto Zen, which is what I practice. The practice of shikantaza, which is just sitting. Centering prayer is kind of just sitting and letting God speak to you. That's how it's framed. But Father Thomas Keating, who was one of the people that kind of developed this or was involved in teaching it, I took a workshop with him one time when he came to Asheville. And when he described it, it was exactly like the kind of Zen meditation that I do, except Dogen Zenji emphasizes the posture, which I think is a very important thing. And one of the things that I was trying to find in spiritual practice at a certain point was a body-mind practice that was all the same. Because as you say, the dance world isn't a particularly, although for me it was a spiritual experience, it wasn't particularly a spiritual world. It was performance oriented and how do we look and that kind of thing. But so I wanted to find a body-mind practice. And I mean, Dogen absolutely speaks to it when he talks about our posture. That's the only thing that he says, pay attention to,
And I think I'd read that you had mentioned that the full lotus posture is like a dance, like it is like a dance in and of itself, which I think is fascinating because I think that uh, there's a stillness that's a part of shikantaza, and there's like a just sitting element where you're just sitting. There's not necessarily a lot of choreography in that sense, but if you open up your definition of what choreography can be and what a dance can be, there's quite a bit of movement happening within that posture, I feel like. And I was just while we're here, how do you, if you were to more extrapolate on it, how would you define the full lotus position or posture as a dance?
Well, I want to tell you a little story. When I was in the monastery in Japan, a woman came from Switzerland. She was a lay woman, and she came to practice. And she was a retired nurse, and she happened to be also have trained as an Alexander Technique teacher. And Alexander Technique is a kind of a body awareness. I hate to use method because just a body awareness, it's a way of becoming aware of where you hold tension in your body and then learning how to kind of release into whatever posture you're in. And so when I came back to the United States, I went back to Minnesota, and she wrote to me. She was in Switzerland, and she said, "I just studied with this great teacher who was already in her 90s, and she had studied with F.M. Alexander, but she lived in Nebraska, which was it's about 400 miles from Minneapolis." So immediately, I got engaged with her and started practicing with her. And I went to a workshop, and what she did in her workshops was she worked with people. She put hands on, to help you become aware of particular areas and release. whatever you do in your life. And all of my dancer friends had said, don't tell her you meditate because she thinks meditation is really stupid and she'll just make fun of you. Well, I took my cushion along anyway, and I thought, well, this is what I do, I'm just going to have to bear it. So I get up there, it's my turn. And she said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I do meditation. And she said, okay, well, show me. And so I sat down on the cushion and she said, well, now think about how did you get there? And I realized I had just plopped myself down on the cushion. So she said, okay, I want you to get up and do this all over. So anyway, long story short, she does all this, she helps me be aware. She asked me all these questions. What do you do? And how long do you sit? And what do you think about? And then she said, well, just remember that even when you're sitting still, there's always movement. There's a dance, right? Just finding the freedom in your body is a dance. If you look at somebody like Baryshnikov, it's because he found the freedom in his body that it's so beautiful. He's not trying to show you something. He's just completely one with the dance. And my very first samadhi experience was in dance. My teacher pushed me and pushed us and pushed us and pushed us. And we were like, oh, we're too exhausted. We don't want to do it again. And she's like, but the class isn't over, do it again. And finally, suddenly you're being danced. There's just movement, that's what samadhi is. It's just letting go. And when I started letting go in my body, it's like meditation practice took on a whole nother dimension.
That's amazing where you at one point felt like you were being danced. And do you feel like sometimes when you're sitting full lotus or in a zazen posture, do you think that there is that, you are being zazened? I mean, do you feel like there is like you are being shinkantaza in that way? Where
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And
Absolutely, because really what the awareness is, if we really can let go, and really the full lotus, if you talk to any yoga person, they'll tell you full lotus is a complete asana, except for the side-to-side movement. And Katagiri Roshi taught us the side-to-side movement with our breathing, which I've actually traced that movement back to the 12th century. But, it's still being done. You breathe and you go down, and you breathe and you go down. And he taught us that as part of meditation training. Now, most people don't do it. I try to emphasize the importance of it, but, people just want to sit down and have it happen, We're so, this is being in the moment, just plop yourself down and now, but it's not like that. It's like, we can be preparing ourselves, when we get up in the morning, now I'm going to go to the cushion. How do I get there?
yeah. And I think that that's a really wonderful reminder too, because I have I practice Soto Zen, and often I find myself doing zazen in my house or things like that. But if whatever time I end up doing it, there is this time where it's like, okay, now I'm gonna lay my mat down and do things carefully, mindfully, and try to put a lot of focus and energy towards the preparation of this ritual that I do and has meaning to me. And then also when I close, it's meaningful to do it like that. But who's to say that the zazen or that approach couldn't happen from the moment I swing my legs off of the bed and start walking around and start going about my day, and then also too before I go to sleep myself. And so it's just a great reminder that we're always kind of in that process. Like there's like, what were you doing before you sat down? Like what were you doing before you plopped yourself down? And it can extend in a vast way. So I appreciate that reminder to take care and to take into account those things that happen before and after and during too. And when it comes to like that sense of movement, I mean, is when you're in that full lotus posture, is it this is it defined more in a abstract kind of beyond way, or is it even just like would your dance the dance instructor or the Alexander teacher say that this is time for you to watch your heart move and your organs to function and your thoughts to kind of flow in and out? Is that count as the movement necessarily, or is it something a little bit more beyond?
I mean, if you've got the ability to be aware of those things, of course, it's great. great. FM Alexander actually did some of that work, that internal work, like when he was having, I don't remember the exact details, but it's something like he was having some heart problem or something like that. And he was able to make that connection. You know, I'm just trying to keep my body up. I'm going to turn 79 this year, and I'm still doing the full lotus. And that'll tell you something about how Alexander technique has helped me, because I think what we do when we get into any posture, but particularly in meditation, is we bring our body habits. You know, so I struggled for many years with back problems, and I've never had knee problems, because when I studied ballet, this was very helpful. I learned that in order to get into first position, you need to open from your joint. And the full lotus is exactly the same thing. And see, people twist their bodies around and then they have trouble with their knees. But if you don't engage your knees, I tell people, put your legs out in front of you and then just let them drop open, let your feet drop open. And then bring your feet up, you know? And I think ballet helped me a lot with the full lotus. But, you know, Alexander technique, and I keep learning new things about my body, you know? But I have a teacher here in town who is very, very good. And we actually teach retreats together at a local retreat center. Their body mind retreats. And she's a lay woman, but she studied in a monastery also in Japan. That was kind of close to the one that I studied. So we kind of I have some Alexander technique under my belt, and she's got some Zen under her belt. So we're very, you know, connected in that way. But she was just here the other day, and her sister's an Alexander technique teacher, and she's been teaching me this way of opening up in my chest. You know, and Alexander technique isn't a matter of moving your muscles. It's a matter of consciously being aware of how she was telling me what's this bone up here? She was telling me
clavicle or the
clavicle. She said, roll your clavicle back. Well, you know, try to do that. You can't really, but you can kind of do it with your mind. And when you do it with your mind, it opens up your shoulders, you know? So there's any number of things. And this teacher that I work with here, she's been teaching me about your core muscles. You know, you can't really feel your core muscles. So you have to be able to kind of mentally identify where they are. Well, that helps a lot with the full lotus, because you aren't holding somewhere. You're kind of identifying where your core muscles are, and you're lining your body up according to that. That's helped me a lot. But it's been, you know, stage by stage.
I have a goal. I have a goal to work up towards being able to do full lotus. I mean, I have some yoga in my background, just like of doing some like flow exercises and all that. But the full lotus has evaded me for years now, and that's because I haven't been practicing it. but I hope to one day. Mm-hmm.
I want to show you something.
Please.
This is the best exercise to learn how to do the full lotus. You bring this into this elbow, this into this elbow, and rock it. Just do that every time you think about it during the week. And that will open up that joint, because that's the biggest problem. And also Alexander technique helped me open up that joint. I worked on it. The Europeans do Alexander technique slightly differently. So I learned this method of kind of breathing and extending with your breath in, you know, up here and going down your arm and going down your legs and things like that. And that really, if you can breathe down to this hip, let me just show you. From here down to this hip, just breathing from the center out, there's a kind of expansion that will happen. And then you continue it from this here down to here and out your knee. And then you continue it, when you get that, you continue it out your foot and out your toe. Well, I did that for a year. Every time I sat down in meditation during that year when I was in the monastery, I would think about those directions. I would take a few minutes just to breathe into all those different directions. And the next year, this same Alexander technique teacher came back, and she said, you know, I said, I want you to work with me. And I got into the full lotus, and she just touched those two places, and that joint just I just felt it open wide up. And she did the same thing on the other side. I mean, emotionally, it took me a couple weeks before I could even talk about Alexander technique anymore, because it was such a big opening. But one of the teachings of Alexander technique is that we lock up in our joints. And if we live like that, and that's why this exercise is so good, because it helps kind of, it's not a stretch, it's an awareness, and but it really eliminates the knee thing.
That's a fascinating, and it's a very helpful way of thinking about that for me, just in the sense of like what we hold. There's always this, like, the body keeps the score. There's this idea like of past traumas or things like that manifesting or being held in your physical body somewhere, and or also just in your mind, but just that joint work of like kind of unsticking something that hasn't had full rotation or full movement in a while, that not only can that benefit your body and your movement and your posture and your dance and your life, but also too, there might be a result of that unlocking, and you might have an emotional experience. There might be a relief or a sensation that is emotional versus solely physical. And
Yes.
is that something that you find within the posture in Zazen? Because I know that there's this mental, if of course it's beyond mental, but like there is a mental experience of Zazen where you're seeing, if you do it for extended periods of time, you can be reminded of some things that are not fun or very exciting and excitable, and kind of lead you down rabbit holes of distraction. But then also too, I mean, like it can just bring up some things you haven't thought about in a long time, because there you are just kind of facing this wall or facing yourself. Do you find that the physical posture of it sometimes can guide that experience, or can kind of unlock some of that uh, otherwise unaddressed or inaccessible for that moment things?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you were describing the Alexander technique and that kind of expansionness, that expansiveness, and expanding your breath from your shoulder to your hip joints, and then expanding it down out through the feet, I couldn't help but kind of think about how that resembles the growth and the sturdiness of a tree. And I know that your Dharma name, Teijo, has uh, that quality. I mean, was there something with your dance background and your practice that when you received your Dharma name that felt like a fit there?
Well, my Dharma name, Teijo, actually means, well, my teacher, here's my teacher translated it as authentic equanimity or right stillness.
Hmm.
I kind of thought was a joke, because I really move a lot, even now in meditation. And I'm always adjusting my body. But when I was dancing, I was moving a lot. And so I was always being teased about moving so much. But Katagiri Roshi gave me this name that means right stillness. And at first I thought it was a joke, but he was really serious about it. He said, "Do you like your name?" And so I thought about it for a long time. And I thought, well, when I have to be still, I can be still. It's sort of like the center of a cyclone, is very still. But I have this kind of like, who's that? Who's that character in the Charlie Brown
Oh,
cartoon?
yeah,
Pigpen.
Pigpen. Yeah,
Got
yeah.
all this stuff going about. But if you really think about Pigpen, he's a real quiet little guy, But he's just got all this stuff going on around him. And and but so that's my Dharma name. And then also there's a way name that I received my way name when I was ordained. And my way name actually means great tree.
Hmm.
And I asked Katagiri Roshi, what does great tree mean? What's a great tree? What kind of tree is that? He said, that's a tree that extends in many directions and nurtures all beings. And when you found a temple, when you start a temple, whatever you name that temple, you take that on as your way name. But rather than doing that, I gave the temple my way name. And partly I felt it was a good name. I didn't want to really give it up. but also I felt like it's kind of the spirit of the practice here. You start with a seed and then just let it grow outwards, in a very natural way.
It's a beautiful name, and I it is it's a wonderful image, and I think that often with images within Zen that I come across in my limited perspective, in my limited viewpoint, it's often clouds, mountains, moon, things like this. But and of course there's the Bodhi tree, and that is an image, but a great tree just it feels like it's a little bit more of an open definition, and there is this like connection between the heavens, the middle, and also deep down in the subterranean too, which is just like a very beautiful bridge component as it expands and kind of can reach every element of the samsaric experience or beyond. And so it's a
And
wonderful name.
of the 10-dimension Dharma world, right?
Yeah.
Goes in every direction infinitely.
Yeah. And on that note too, because I know that you had mentioned that this year is your 50th anniversary of your ordination, but also too, I mean, if I have my math done correctly, which is hopefully is the case, but I believe you founded Great Tree Zen Women's Temple in 2005, and I think we might be coming up on 20 years of
This is we call this our 20th anniversary. Actually, we became a 501(c)(3) in 2003.
oh,
So in a sense, it's not, but we account from the time we moved in.
okay.
But this would be our 20th anniversary. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this ceremony this year too. It's kind of a celebration time.
Yeah, and that happens in the fall, is that right? The celebration?
And September 7th, right?
Mm-mm. And is there a precedent for other uh Zen centers or Zen temples that this is kind of going to uh base itself on, or is this a unique to Great Tree, the way
Well,
it's going
this,
to go?
this
Mhm.
ceremony is we're following a lot of the Japanese tradition of this, and actually what it is it's kind of an installation ceremony for the community invites someone to become their abbess or their abbot, and I should have really done it 20 years ago, but it's expensive because you need 12 priests here. And our priests are scattered all over the country. In Japan, you can just bicycle around the neighborhood and get enough priests to do it. And you need a specific priest. And because people are coming from all over the country, you have to find accommodations for them and feed them and all that kind of stuff. So it's expensive. And we were paying the mortgage until about 2020, you know. And
Yeah,
so my has been after me to do this. And I said, I can't deal with that because we don't have any money. We're just barely paying the mortgage. And so anyway, she was after me to do it for many years. And so I said, okay, now we've paid the mortgage, we can do this. And then quarantine happened. And so I said, why don't we do it for the 20th anniversary, kind of a celebratory thing. And it's kind of cool because we're a little bit more settled now. It's like the seed has sprouted and now it's starting to come above ground, kind of.
certainly. And I saw a video, I think it was done 4 years ago, but it is on the YouTube, the Great Tree YouTube channel, and it's a tour of the grounds and of the building itself, and it looks like a really wonderful space. And I know
Oh,
you're in the meditation hall now.
yeah,
Um,
and
yeah, and it's wooded around, and it's a way, but also too, I mean, there's just this beautiful right before the meditation hall. There is this walkway there's a light screen, it looks like, and you can just observe the sunset. Is that right? Typically when
yes.
yeah,
Basically it's a screen porch. And it was connected, but it wasn't connected to this room that we use for the meditation hall was built as a game room. This whole place was built before we bought it.
mm,
And so, I mean, but it's perfect for a meditation hall. And it has a little connection to the house, which is over the carport. And so there was the little connection to the kitchen, and then there was the porch. And so there was kind of an empty corner that just went down. And the screen porch was screened off, and there was a wall. So first of all, we thought if there's ever a fire in the meditation hall, it will happen in the kitchen. So we'd be stuck in here. So we need another exit. So somebody said, why don't you just connect the screen porch? So they put a sliding door in and connected the screen porch. So that's the entryway into the meditation hall. We tell people, don't go through the kitchen, go around, because otherwise, if somebody's working in the kitchen, it's a bother and things. So you have to walk through that screen porch, and it so happens that you get a really good view of the sunset from there. And
Perfect.
so on the way to meditation, a lot of times people are just stopping and looking at the sunset. It's quite beautiful. And also recently, our septic tank needs to be replaced. And so they identified a new place as septic. They took out a whole bunch of trees, which gives us a lot better view of the mountains.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. That's perfect. And yeah, it really is a special place, and I know it has like some like different cabins for sleeping cabins, and you have a garden that you're developing and working on. And I know that this is a space that it's open to everyone to practice. Anyone can practice there, but there is a women's centered residential program that you have, and and that was something that you've been thinking about well before the ground break on the building itself where you are now. This is something that you've been thinking about since I think the mid '80s, early '80s, or something like that, maybe even beyond. And what made establishing something like that so meaningful and important to have a space where women can have a a place to practice and to do formal practice and training and to do some things that uh, are are available to them in that way.
Well, it's Zen is generally kind of a dominantly male practice. And Minnesota, I remember they had just moved from Southeast Minneapolis to where they are on Lake Calhoun now. When I started, I think I only visited the Southeast place one time. And part of the reason why women weren't coming at that point was because, it's a lot harder to move a family than it is to move for individuals to move. But I really kept walking in there thinking, where are the women? You know, I felt a little lonely, And over the years, a few more women came, but they were challenged because they were raising children and things like that, which is, one of my passions is having children's programs. And that's when I started the children's programs. I started them in Minnesota in about 1977 because I felt like the kids didn't feel comfortable at the Zen Center, and they felt uncomfortable that their parents were leaving them to go to this place they didn't feel comfortable in. So I started these children's programs just to let them know. And I mean, when I do children's programs, they learn how to ring the bells, they learn how to serve formal tea, they learn how to, do all the things their parents do, you know. And I'd drag Katagiri Roshi down and say, okay, now give a talk. Of course, they didn't understand a word he was saying, but they just loved having him there. Again, that presence. So, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So then when I went to Tassajara, my second practice period, particularly, I noticed that there were a lot of, that was predominantly men. It was like 3 men to every woman or something like that. And that was when I had this idea to start the women's place, because I felt like women's insights were getting lost. And as a person who is a product of Catholic girls' schools, there were always women around me where if I would have some insight, it would be heard. And that wasn't happening to me in the Zen world. I was actually swallowing my own insights, because sometimes if you're not encouraged in something you say, then you just don't think it's important. So I thought, why am I doing this? Why am I letting myself be dominated? We need a place where women can be together and reinforce each other's insights so that we aren't saying, we're not being heard, where we're saying, listen, this is important. I want to say this, we're acknowledging our own insights. But somehow, it's hard to do that especially when you've been trained in a certain way, to be more submissive, which is kind of my generation, you know. And men do have a very kind of dominant role in our culture, in a sense. People say, "Oh, Japan is so hierarchical," but it seems a lot worse to me in the West, that there's this idea of hierarchy rather than seeing everyone has different roles. But I'm inside this culture and not that one. I'm looking at that one from the outside, so I can't say. But so anyway, so that was kind of, and it was just, I would say it was more like a vision that all of a sudden I was just having lunch one day, and it was just a day off kind of. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, I should start a women's practice center where, women can practice together and reinforce each other's insights. So that's how it all started. And then I thought, oh, I'm not ready. And I kept saying I'm not ready, but I kept talking about it. So my friends, especially my friends at Minnesota Zen Center, were going, when are you going to start this? When are you going to start this? And then I don't know if you probably haven't talked to Shohaku Okamura, but I stayed at his temple for a while in Japan, after Katagiri Roshi died. And we were working on a translation of one of Dogen's writings. And he wanted to come to the United States at some point. And then at a certain point, Minnesota Zen Center invited him. And so once he got to the United States, we were trying to figure out, how he was going to start his group, how he was going to, because he wanted to do things in the tradition of his teacher, Uchiyama Kosho Roshi. And he also wanted to be in America because he wanted to be with English speakers to help him with his translations. He was at that point. And so I was very interested in getting him here. So just about the time I was ready to get started, which was sometime in the late 90s, he said, can you help me? So I got involved with him for 5 years. But that was a big help in helping me start Great Tree too, because I learned a lot from that. But so anyway, we really didn't get started until 2001. And then I mentioned it to somebody in the Charlotte group. I also have a small group in Charlotte. And I mentioned it to somebody, and she just took the ball and ran and created a board. And all of a sudden,
Amazing. And you had so much support, and yeah, it's amazing that you also like took that time to say, oh, I'm not ready, but then you just couldn't stop thinking about it. You couldn't stop like having that initiative to want to have it happen. And also too, I mean, there is it's born of some kind of some sadness. I mean, just to have to swallow some insights and to not be able to to share them and to be heard, and to not have spaces for that. And yeah, certainly the patriarchal, hierarchical structures that happen in various places within America, especially, it makes it so confining, constraining. So I'm glad that you were able to find some friends that can help kind of facilitate that growth. And what was it like, kind of founding a Zen center just outside of Asheville? I mean, what was that kind of difficult to do with, like, I don't know if all the neighbors or the township was okay with it, or was it more or less seamless? Because I know it's open to everyone to come in, but I was wondering, was that like how was it received when it started to kind of become more established?
well, I actually, I came here in 1992, and one of my reasons, part of what I wanted to do when I came here is, I have a friend who started a retreat center here called Southern Dharma Retreat Center, and she had a cabin on the adjacent property. She had bought some property that she kept to create a community to be a buffer for the retreat center. And so she had this cabin, but then she had just moved into Asheville, but just shortly before I met her. And I was at a place where I had been just immersed in Zen, in the Zen world, monasteries and my teacher and everything for about 15 or 16 years. And I just needed some time to sleep. I was just tired, and I wanted to do some processing. So one of the things I had on my list of things that I wanted to do was to be a hermit for a while. So she said, "Oh, you can use my cabin." And so I was like, perfect. So I moved out here at first to move into her cabin, but I was really the only like certified Zen teacher in the area. There were people that were kind of leading little groups, but they weren't very high profile or anything like that. But for some reason, people discovered that I was there, and I was giving retreats there a couple times a year too. And pretty soon it got so that I was driving back and forth so much, and it's way out in the mountains. It's sometimes you can't even get out in the winter. So I moved into town, and as soon as I moved into town, people were saying, "Well, can we have a study group? Can we have meditation? Can we have an all-day sitting? Can we have children's meditation?" We had like 5 different places where we were meeting. And then this person that started Southern Dharma said to me, she said, "I would like to invest in some property." And she said, "If you can help me find a place that would be suitable, maybe we could just start a little Zen center space where you could do everything, and then you wouldn't be meeting all over the place." And so I said, great. So I helped her find, it was just a little house in West Asheville, and we used the living room for meditation hall. I lived in one of the bedrooms, and we had a Buddha hall in the other bedroom. And then she gave us kind of a good deal because she was a Zen person too. And so she gave us a good deal for the first 5 years on the rent. And so, and then there was a lawyer that was kind of connected with me who was a Buddhist who wanted to put us on the map. So he made us a 501c3. So that's still happening. The Zen Center of Asheville is still happening. So I already had quite a bit of support in Asheville. So we're only about 15 minutes outside of Asheville. Interestingly enough, though, almost all of my students were men. And when I wanted to start this women's center, they were like, "Why do you want to start a women's center? Almost all your students are men." And I'm like, do you see? Look. So anyway, yeah, but they've come around, and they're really helping out a lot, and they're keeping the Zen Center of Asheville going. They kind of move it around. They aren't in the same structure. Now they're meeting at the Quaker Meeting House, and it's a good solid little group. They just move around a lot, and but they help Great Tree a lot. And as far as the neighborhood where I live, I mean, not to get into anything political, but it's a fairly conservative neighborhood. But you know what? Katagiri Roshi used to say, "Your zazen gets into the walls." But you know what? I think it goes beyond the walls, because all of our neighbors, the neighbor right next to us is the daughter of a Baptist minister. She's very religious. You don't call her on Sunday, but she's one of the best neighbors, that you can imagine. I mean, and she knows what we're doing. And all of our neighbors, I mean, like when the hurricane happened, when we didn't have water, we only didn't have water for a few days because we have a well and we didn't have any electricity for a few days. But our neighbors were just bringing us water because they have generators, we don't talk politics. We don't talk religion. Right down below us, there's a guy that started, well, actually, he's a 2nd or 3rd generation lily farmer. So we didn't show this on the video, but when you drive up the street to come to Great Tree, there's this huge lily farm, and he sells lily bulbs. But there's lilies, and he's just created this beautiful space, and people come from out of town to see it. He has times when, so I don't know what you were, oh yeah. So our neighbors, I'm a little reluctant to, be too forward with our neighbors because I'm from up north and they're Southerners. I mean, that's more of a reluctance than my Buddhism. But they're all very, very kind. The guy right across the road mows our lower lawn, because we just don't get down there and mow it. But when he mows his, he just comes up and mows ours, and I wave and say thank you. I mean, it's really we've got nice neighbors, and they're good people.
Yeah, and it's such a wonderful. It's really affirming and very positive uh, to hear all of that because you come in and you find yourself being in demand. You're there. You are trying to be a hermit, and people are kind of knocking on your door all the time, asking you to do things. And then slowly by this little network that was being built with you around you, you finally get to have this space. And then two, even if there are differences with religion, even if there are political differences, those aren't going to get in the way, it sounds like, of community, of the humanness, of the humanity that you can have where should a hurricane happen and power is out or wells are dried up or otherwise unusable, that there is a neighborhood that does come together and has like uh, a looking out for each other kind of quality. And that's a really wonderful thing to hear. And then also just this someone that drives over and mows your lawn for you. I mean, like that's really sweet. And there's this kind of generosity that's being shared. And then there's generosity from the great tree that's also extending beyond those walls, the zazen that's extending beyond those walls and offering um all the things in all the directions that a great tree can do. So I'm just very uh, happy to hear that. I mean, it's just very uh, positive, and no, it just feels like a nice thing to hear, especially these days. So thank you for going into that. And I just had two quick questions, because I know that you have uh, an event coming up in the fall, but I wanted to kind of create a space for you to promote anything that you'd like to promote. I don't know if there's something that you're working on personally, or if there's something with Great Tree Zen Women's Temple that you'd like to share, or if there are other causes and foundations that you'd like to have people know more about. And then also too, the second question is more about if you have any advice that you'd want to give to somebody that's going along the Buddhist path that you would have wanted to have heard as you were going through it earlier on.
So which question do you want me to answer first?
Oh, whichever comes to mind.
Um, well, okay. As far as advice, I don't think that, I'm sort of the thinking that we kind of learn through our experience. This is a real experiential practice. And honestly, when I first went to the Zen Center, one of the issues I had with the Indian center that I went to, the meditation place, was I felt like I was being told too much. And having come out of, I was quite a strict Catholic. I would say kind of rigid in a lot of ways. And I really took on and didn't really pay attention to my own personal awareness. And so I felt like by the time I got to the Zen world, which was really several years after I left the convent, I was already turning 29 when I met Katagiri Roshi. I didn't want to be told what to do. And I came to this Zen practice with my teacher thinking, if anybody tells me what to do, I'm out of here, that kind of thing. I just want to sit here and see what the experience is. And if I want to stay, I'll stay. And if I don't want to stay, I won't. And I thought I'll commit myself to, I think it was like 2 months or something like that in the beginning, just so that I felt like I was really giving it a try and not just jumping around from one thing to another. And and I think, that really is, I didn't realize it at the time because I didn't really know too much about Zen or Buddhism when I first started doing it. I just thought, I feel like that's kind of in the spirit of Shikantaza, is to just sit and see what happens. But the other thing, I guess if I gave you any advice, I'd say find a teacher, somebody that you trust. And that was the best thing that I can say that I did. Because if you try to do it on your own, you're always kind of judging yourself from your own way of thinking. And our way of thinking is only based on what we already know. I always say our minds are like computers, we can only process from what's been put into there, right? And so, but if you have some outside perspective, teacher and sangha, you know, the community is, I think, underplayed in the Zen world, particularly. But in Japan, the way they describe sangha is if you take potatoes and put them into a bucket and put in a little bit of water and roll them around, the potatoes all wash each other. So it's that kind of image. And I mean, I myself am very drawn to a very traditional practice because I think there's a lot of things in the tradition. On the other hand, I mean, I have this, sometimes I feel a little schizophrenic because I'm really kind of modern in a lot of ways, you know, kind of like almost secular in a lot of ways. But the Zen world, the Soto Zen world kind of provides for that, you know, that you can be a person that follows things that, you know, there's not so many don'ts, you know. It's more of an experiential thing. So I heard one time that Thich Nhat Hanh said, if you want to quit smoking cigarettes, just smoke and smoke and smoke until you get really sick of it.
Yeah.
But and I'm not doing it because Thich Nhat Hanh said that. That's the way I've always been, you know. It's like, let me just figure it out from my own experience. If I mess up, well, I've always got Zazen to get me straightened out, you know, because I think we know we have that wisdom within us. But I think it's helpful to find a good teacher. And the reason I think it's helpful to find a good teacher that you trust is so that you will go a little bit beyond what you think you can do. And if you don't trust the person that you call a teacher, you're going to get to a place where you're going to be challenged, but you're going to hit a wall. You're going to be challenged by the practice and you'll get stuck there. If you have a teacher that helps you stay with it, then you can realize that there's no wall there, you know.
Mm.
But I had enough trust in Katagiri Roshi that I didn't even have to talk to him. I just trusted that if I fell, he'd be there to catch me, you know.
It's a really everything that you're saying was just wonderful to hear, especially that idea that, you know, if you don't seek out a teacher, if you don't have other kind of sangha or other influence, you're much like a computer where it's like you can process things, you can do all that, but you're limited to what your bandwidth is. You know, there's only so much that you can do. Whereas a teacher can help guide and help expand, and you know, maybe there's this well of wisdom that's actually within you this whole time that they can kind of help you uncover and dissolve some of these perceived walls that you might be putting up around yourself. I appreciate those images. Those are really helpful for understanding that relationship that you could that a teacher can offer you, but also that relationship that you can have with yourself that can lock you in, more or less. And then as far as like anything coming up, I don't know if there's anything that you'd want to promote or causes or anything like that, but I would be happy to hear about any of those.
Well, I'll just mention that, you know, I think people would have a great opportunity to learn a lot about, particularly about body-mind practice, by coming to some of our Saturday morning Zoom lectures. Every Saturday morning we have one. And for example, this Saturday, there's a yoga teacher that was originally part of the Zen Center of Asheville Sangha and put her daughter through the whole family meditation program here at Great Tree. So she's been very involved in the Zen world. And she comes on seasonally and talks about the seasons and our bodies in relation to the seasons. And she actually leads us through some yoga. There's another person who comes on 4 or 5 times a year who's a doctor of Chinese medicine. And she talks about, she's an expert in food for healing from the Chinese medicine perspective. But she's also kind of comes from the Taoist tradition, which is something I'm very interested in. And she talks about seasonally too, about what our feelings, you know, how our feelings align with the seasons and how our, what kind of foods we should be looking at eating in order to support the balance in our bodies. And so we have some good opportunities, you know, for looking at that body mind awareness, as well as, I mean, I invite a lot of good speakers to come and speak about Zen. You know, we had a couple good speakers talk about this ceremony that we're going to have in fall and what the meaning of it is, to kind of let people know what it's all about, you know. And so that's the thing that I would most strongly probably promote. And then we have full moon ceremonies every full moon at 7 o'clock on Zoom and in person. We've got hybrid for just about everything. And then if there's anybody around that has kids, our kids all grew up, so we're starting the family meditation all over, you know. Of course, the kids are coming back to help with it, but now they're in their 20s, so, you know, they're not little kids anymore.
Well, and it's wonderful to hear that there's this accessibility thing where, you know, if you're not in the Asheville area, then you can join via Zoom, and that there's a lot of really wonderful programming that's put up onto your YouTube channel as well. But certainly you can join more on a live basis through your Zoom. And also too, just on the note on the children's programming, I don't have personal experience with it, but the images that are on Great Tree Zen Women's Temple's website, it looks like the kids are having a ball, and it looks like such a fun place to be. And you have these like old tractors, it sounds like, or at least you had an old tractor kind of set up. It's just that it looks like a perfect place for a kid to kind of have some uh, experiences and some activity that you can't get certainly in the city. But it just seems like you offer a lot to have some joy and some fun that allows for the whole family to participate in practice, as opposed to it just being kind of an adults only. And you allow mothers to come, and you allow fathers to come, and that allows for a greater engagement. So thank you for offering things like that. I mean, it's really important. Reverend Teijo, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. This is such a joy to speak with you, especially in such a momentous year for yourself and for your sangha. It's awesome. That's so cool. So thank you very much as we go into this weekend, and I hope you have a wonderful celebrations all around.